I remember the first alert arriving without ceremony, a single line promoted to the top of my docket. The glyph for emergency codex clearance pulsed at the edge of my vision, asking nothing, allowing nothing. I authorized the reroute with my seal and watched the entire archive fold itself into war posture. Civilian queues suspended, devotional time boxes reclaimed, bandwidth reassigned to priority channels I was never meant to see. My bench smelled of hot ink and sanctified oil. I placed both hands on the ledger console and steadied the tremor that did not belong to the machine. Hestara Nines wears dusk like a uniform. Refinery stacks ring the horizon in a crown of black fire, and ash falls in a slow, polite snow. Our administratum bastion sits inside the Eastern Prometheum hub, a chapel built from filing cabinets and faith. I was made to keep numbers obedient. Tithes in, manifests out. Compliance expressed as columns that balanced at day's end. When the first battle barge registered on orbital traffic, it entered my life as a reference code and a weight adjustment to the shipping tables. The sky might have been burning. My screen remained very calm. The override expanded. Fleet logistics partitions opened of their own accord, admitting designations above my clearance. I did not read the names. I read their effects. Bulk allocations rekeyed to Expeditionary Astartes assets. Hab sectors reassigned from civil oversight to custodial audit, a phrase that sounded like mercy and behaved like a blade. A notice slid into view, all work hours consecrated to strategic necessity until rescinded. I affixed my seal again, as if my obedience could transform the line into a prayer. Across the bastion, functionaries rose from their benches in the same practiced motion, heads bowed toward the lumen crest that pretends to be daylight. The scribe 2 aisles over whispered the old reassurance work is worship and returned to stamping dead letters into silence. I kept my eyes on the docket. The second barge arrived with a cooler signature, as though the void itself had learned restraint. I remember thinking that restraint is the most expensive luxury in the Imperium. It seldom survives contact with reality. A new pane opened. Population movement hold. The word hold, in administratum language, does not mean pause. It means a hand has descended over the board and no piece may move without permission. I queried, per doctrine. The response arrived as a blessing stripped of grammar. Comply. I complied. Outside, sirens did not sound. Hestara prefers the quiet threat of pressure doors cycling and the long, patient breath of pumps that never rest. Inside, the archive grew warmer by a single degree as the presses took on new labor. A column titled Provender Refuge appeared, then grayed out before I could expand it. The system decides what I may know. My job is to reconcile what remains. I remember the first time I saw an Astartes on a devotional broadside, gold leaf peeling at the corners. Today they arrived as ledger entries, heraldry recorded as pigment values, strength expressed in calories, holiness translated into freight. The conversion sickened me, not because it was wrong, but because it fit too well. I balanced the figures. The figures balanced me. When the high-band imprimatur stamped the top of the page, I felt the weight of something vast lean across my bench. The numbers inhaled. My world exhaled. The docket reflowed around the imprimatur like metal around a die. Sectors blinked from civic custody to audit custody, and whole neighborhoods became lines that ended in clean punctuation. I was made to accept punctuation as mercy. A sentence concluded cannot suffer further. Still, I watched the closures march down the page with the steadiness of a blade learning patience. A courier from the refinery wards arrived at my station, frost in his hair from the chilled transfer ducts. He laid a slate on the bench without meeting my eyes. The seal impressed upon its face belonged to an office I had only ever seen as a rumor in the index. I broke it, read the header, Angels Resplendent, Chapter Asset, Custodial Authority, Transference, and felt my breath turn administrative. The slate did not ask for faith. It demanded throughput. Names fed into columns, streets became vectors, the city translated into work. I remember the catechism of reconciliations, do not question data, question your hunger to know. I verified the inputs. A notation kept repeating along the margins, reclassification event pending. In our language, reclassification means a life will be moved to a category that does not write letters home. I flagged the repetition according to minor irregularity protocol and sent it into the eddies that circle above my pay grade. The reply returned almost instantly, like a hand swatting a fly. Irregularity resolved by authority. Proceed. The bastions, floor thrummed. Not fear machinery. Bulk elevators taking on more than they should. Somewhere in the stacks, the charter bell rang twice, acknowledging a jurisdictional revision. My supervisor drifted past, lips moving with the speed of someone reassigning prayers to fit a changing liturgy. "Clerk," she said without stopping, "all audits are now audits of audits. We are not to generate questions at this time." I stamped my seal to the thought and felt myself grow a measure lighter, as if surrender had weight you could set down. Through the viewport slit above my bench, dusk tried to become night and failed. The refinery crown painted the clouds in unwholesome oranges. Ash continued its apologetic descent. A child once asked me if the sky ever closes for maintenance. I told him the sky was our maintenance. The memory returned like a mislabeled file, unwanted and correct. On my console, a new ledger unfurled, shelter allocations. HAB sublevels 914 then vanished, replaced by transit denial. All civil egress temporarily sanctified. Temporarily sanctified is a phrasing invented by people afraid of the word forbidden. I copied the line into the Daily Digest without alteration. Words lose their teeth when they pass through my hands. This is one of the reasons we are trusted. The first headcount updates arrived. They came not as totals but as differences, as if the system wished to teach me subtraction before confession. Sublevel 12, minus 4,321. Sublevel 10, minus 9,877. The figures wore the calm of finalized accounts. I checked the signature hash authentic. I checked the timestamp contemporary. I checked myself for revolt and found only method. A second courier appeared with a smaller seal. He looked as if he had slept under a desk and dreamed of nothing. "By hand," he whispered, and set the envelope on the corner of my bench no one uses because it implies intimacy. Inside, a single line handwritten with an ink that smelled faintly of camphor. "Do not index the word mercy today." There was no countersignature. The envelope did not exist long enough to matter. Protocol consumed it in a little mouth of flame. I remember thinking that prohibitions arrive only after habits have done their work. I had already stopped indexing mercy hours ago. The docket had trained me. A shadow fell across the bench. Not from above, from the docket itself, where a new pane expanded until it occluded the lesser tiles. Custodial Audit Phase Initiation, Hestara IX. Below it, a rule I had never read outside hypotheticals. Civilian records migrate to strategic custody pending purity assessment. Civil usage of ledger halted until further notice. My hands remained where duty keeps them. In the space between my palms and the stone, I felt the world pass into someone else's grammar. The docket dimmed, icons dissolving as authority retracted visibility. The archive reverted to its devotional hum, each lumen cycling through the approved shade of obedience. I leaned back, fingers hovering above the seal pad. Habit compelled me to check the ledger one last time. Faith told me not to. Between them, I hesitated just long enough for understanding to find me. A new line had appeared at the base of the docket's smaller font, unlit, waiting for attention it shouldn't receive. Subsection access. Custodial debrief. Personal clearance confirmed. Personal clearance. I had not requested any. The system's courtesy frightened me more than command ever could. I opened it. The text that unfolded wasn't text at all. It was a sequence of pulse intervals, 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. The same rhythm the refinery stacks used to vent pressure safely. I translated it by instinct into syllables that resembled words. Purity begins where memory ends. I shut the pane, but the words remained, impressed on the insides of my eyelids. The bastion's lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. I realized it wasn't power fluctuation. It was synchronization. The entire archive had been folded into the custodial rhythm. From this point forward, every cycle of illumination would sing that same invisible hymn. I looked up. The ceiling's aquila seemed lower. Its wings curved inward like hands around a candle. The scribe across from me hadn't moved. She was still stamping requisitions, her lips forming soundless benedictions. The smell of burnt camphor returned, stronger now. Somewhere in the ducts, a fan hesitated mid-turn. I thought of the note, "Do not index the word mercy today." It occurred to me that perhaps mercy had been indexed elsewhere. I remember silence teaching me that obedience is the sound of something vast choosing not to speak. The archive pulsed again. The same line reappeared, this time authorized for broadcast across the planetary grid. Civilians would see it as a devotional reminder. We, its custodians, would see the checksum. I sent the authorization. The console confirmed transmission. For a moment, the walls themselves seemed to breathe the sound of an entire world exhaling comprehension. The docket folded itself closed. My shift clock reset to 0, though the hour had not changed. New instructions crawled up the sidebar. Await compliance audit. Prepare for direct inspection. I glanced toward the sealed corridor that led to the surface tramways. Air shimmered faintly there, as if heat rose from the stone, but the temperature read steady. I knew then that whatever approach did not use temperature as mortals understood it. I was made to verify, not to believe. But belief had begun its audit without my consent. I turned off the lumen at my station. In the half-dark, the symbols on the last slate glowed of their own accord, patient as embers. The ash outside thickened against the window. Somewhere above, the angels resplendent were landing in formation, and the world was already rearranging itself to be worthy of them. I remained at my desk, waiting to be read. They arrived, without ceremony. No horns, no vox chant, no public decree. The airlock seals disengaged with the same sigh that accompanies every courier delivery, and yet every lumen in the corridor dimmed to half strength. Sound folded inward, as though the bastion itself held its breath. 3 of them stepped through the vapor mist. Astartes, the angels resplendent. Gold lacquered plate that reflected nothing, visors black as denial. Even before they spoke, the air thickened around them. Gravity seemed to recognize authority. Behind them came a smaller silhouette, an attaché of the Ordo Minoris, I think, though his robes were bleached to the same indifferent hue. I was made to recognize rank by context, not fear, but fear is its own taxonomy. I stood as one stands for communion. The lead marine inclined his helm, a movement less greeting than verification. Administratum Hestara Iings, came the vox-toned verdict, custodial audit initiated, present records. The words struck like cold water. My voice failed the first attempt, recovered on the second. Compliance directory prepared, my lord. I gestured to the sealed data nodes. The marine stepped forward. Each motion displaced the scent of oil and ozone. He placed a gauntlet nearly the size of my torso against the access shrine. The machine spirit inside awakened, chattering binaric prayers that overlapped into panic. The locks disengaged. Files unspooled in bright green holographs, cascading population manifests, rations, fuel metrics, labor registries. He viewed them in silence, his helm tracking line by line. Behind him, the second marine traced his finger through the light, deleting columns as though erasing a memory he already knew by heart. Each deletion adjusted the total count, numbers compressing inward. Entire sectors folded out of existence. The attaché's voice drifted behind the gold figures. Purge levels within tolerances. Contagion vectors consistent with psychic contamination. Authorization for escalation remains pending final cross-theater command. I did not understand half the words, but their rhythm told me everything. The audit was not discovery. It was confirmation. They had already judged. We were evidence, not participants. I remember thinking that their silence was worse than threat. Threats are human. Silence is procedural. The lead marine turned toward me again. His presence filled the corridor. I could not see the walls beyond him. Clerk, he said, the title weighing more than my name ever had. Your records will assist in salvation. Yes, my lord, I answered. You will provide clarity. Clarity absolves. I will. He nodded once, motion clipped to prevent mercy. Then they moved on, footsteps too heavy for the floor yet leaving no mark. The attaché lingered long enough to hand me a slate sealed with their chapter's emblem, two mirrored wings enclosing a burning sun. The file within opened automatically upon touch, displaying a list of audit zones. My own bastion occupied the first line. When they departed, the pressure eased, and sound returned timidly to the hall. The scribes exhaled as one. My supervisor collapsed into her chair and began reciting inventory formulas under her breath. I stared at the slate until my eyes blurred. I remember silence teaching me reverence. Now it taught recursion. The same words, repeated, until meaning became faith. The angels had begun their work. The first night after their arrival, the archive didn't sleep. Consoles glowed long past curfew, spilling soft green light across the marble desks. Every clerk pretended purpose, yet each of us knew the same thing. Our work had already been overtaken by higher arithmetic. We were remainders in a calculation too vast for our comprehension. From my bench, I could see the refinery's outer gantries through a narrow window. They burned brighter than usual, casting golden reflections across the storm haze. I wondered if that light came from fire or from the descent of orbiting craft. Both would be holy, according to the same index. The audit began in earnest at dawn. Marines moved through the lower sectors with monastic precision, escorted by silence and the scent of lubricant. Vox orders came in pulses, no syntax, only command signatures. I translated their binary headers for record-keeping, though translation was unnecessary, their meaning was erasure. At 9, a request arrived for civilian inventory verification. The term should have referred to food or fuel. Instead, the document included HAB block coordinates and population estimates. Verification, in this new dialect, meant counting to 0. I stamped my approval, as procedure required. My hand didn't shake. The quill in its machine socket, however, trembled from current flux. By mid-shift, the lower ducts began venting smoke. No alarm sounded. The sensors reported controlled purification. From below, faint, rhythmic bursts echoed 3, pause, 3, the same cadence that haunted the archive's power cycles. Someone whispered that the angels were sanctifying the tunnels. Another whispered they were sealing them. Both might be true. I remember the sound of boots that were not meant for floors of stone. Each step arrived before hearing, pressure preceding vibration. When the lead Marine entered the upper hall, the scribes froze as though the light itself demanded attention. He advanced to the central dais where our master cogitator pulsed. The machine spirit recognized hierarchy instantly. The screen bled open, revealing root directories none of us had ever viewed. "Clerk," he said, without turning his helm. I rose. "My lord, do you believe the Emperor protects this world?" The question hung longer than allowed by etiquette. "I do." I managed. He regarded the data stream, its lines reflecting across his armor like veins of molten glass. "Then believe that he demands proof of protection." "Yes, my lord." The machine shuddered once and fell silent. "Proof begins with silence," he said. They departed. The cogitator remained dark for an entire hour before rebooting with an abbreviated interface. When it returned, half of our archives were missing, not corrupted, but absent, as though never written. I checked the checksum. Perfection. The system no longer recalled what had vanished. I was made to catalog reality. Now reality edited itself faster than I could record. That evening, a memo circulated. Compliance progression within expectations. Praise be his measure. No author listed. We all recited it aloud before rest cycle. No one believed it, but the rhythm soothed us like a prayer we'd forgotten was meant for someone else. Outside, the refinery stacks burned cleaner that night. Smoke rose, without scent. By the third day, the word audit no longer required explanation. It moved through the Vox like weather, unowned and absolute. Civilians whispered it the way pilgrims whisper a saint's name. quietly, so that recognition would not sound like guilt. Our bastion received new instructions every 2 hours, each transmission shorter than the last. Whole paragraphs disappeared into abbreviations, abbreviations into symbols, until only timestamps remained. I learned to interpret omission as intent. At midday, a tremor rolled through the foundation. Dust fell from the ceiling in graceful arcs. The walls emitted a low harmonic, one note away from the refinery's standard venting rhythm. I checked the seismic logs, no quake recorded. I checked the population feed. Sector 6 had been reclassified to uninhabited. I entered the update, sealed it, and sent it upward. The line disappeared, approval immediate. When the angels resplendent returned, they came alone, no attaché this time. 3 again, though I could not be sure they were the same 3. Their armor bore ash smears in the shape of human hands. None of us spoke. The lead Marine extended a palm toward the console array. "You will provide closure," he said. "Yes, my lord. Closure verifies faith." He stepped aside to allow me access. The audit file stood open, ready for the next entry. I typed as ordered, converting coordinates into numeric denominations. Each completed field triggered a faint chime, soft as glass breaking in another room. Behind me, the Marines waited, still as statues carved from obedience. Halfway through the ledger, the screen flickered. For a moment, the data collapsed into a single image, a street full of figures on their knees, faces turned toward a rising light. Then the image folded back into numbers. I looked to the Marine. His visor reflected only my outline, thin and trembling. "The Emperor sees intention," he said, as if answering a thought I had not spoken. When the record was complete, he placed a gauntlet on the console's frame. The metal groaned but held. "This world yields well," he observed. "Its faith required only editing." The phrase carried no malice, only assessment. He gestured toward the refinery spire, visible through the viewport. A column of flame reached the clouds. "When the song ends, Clark, you will archive the silence." "Yes, my lord." They turned and departed, their reflections lingering in the glass like after-images. I sat until the console cooled beneath my hands. The chime of finalized entries continued, though no one touched the keys. That evening, the bastion's corridors filled with mist from the ventilation ducts. The air tasted of iron and incense. My supervisor distributed ration wafers and reminded us that the Emperor's protection often resembles absence. None of us responded. We chewed the wafers until they became dust and continued typing into terminals that now offered no confirmation of receipt. Outside, the refinery flames dimmed. The stacks vented one final plume, then fell silent. The sky over Hestara Ix turned the color of closing eyes. I remember silence teaching me patience. Now it began to teach endurance. The transmissions began to arrive without headers. No origin, no checksum, no hierarchy marks. They slipped through channels supposedly sealed by decree, blooming across every terminal like unwanted prayers. Each one bore a voice metallic, calm, carrying that same rhythm of 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. I was made to discern structure inside noise. That is what an archivist does. But this was not noise. This was the sound of something vast, remembering itself. The first message said only, "All audits complete. Await confirmation." The second corrected it. "Await confirmation of silence." The third contained an image half corrupted of Hestara's equatorial refinery belt from orbit. The light blooming across it was too symmetrical to be fire and too constant to be mercy. I remember once studying the etymology of compliance. It means to fill with or to complete by bending. The planet bent. The bastion's vox arrays began to hum in chorus. Scribes left their benches to listen. Faces turned upward like parishioners awaiting benediction. The tones merged into the shape of speech without words. I realized then that the audit reports had never been for us. They were the prayer by which the planet confessed. I checked the population registers again. Every hab block now bore the same status. Custodial cleansing pending. The timestamps all matched, synchronized to the moment the Marines departed the lower levels. I opened the error log to search for a pattern, but the machine refused to call it error. The field returned a single phrase in red, corrected. From the southern windows, we saw the first light arcs crawl up the horizon. Orbital bombardment, distant but deliberate. The refinery crown glowed like a halo forced onto a corpse. The ground beneath us trembled, each vibration repeating that cursed interval. My supervisor collapsed in her seat, whispering inventory codes until they slurred into psalms. The rest of us stood in silence, listening to the machine chant echoing through the ducts. There is a point where faith and terror become acoustically indistinguishable. I turned back to the console. A new pane had opened, not by command but by implication. Custodial confirmation required. Clerk-grade witness verification. The cursor blinked patiently, awaiting my seal. I hesitated. The implication was clear. The system required a human signature to finish dying. I signed. The world accepted. At once, every lumen in the hall dimmed to nothing. The Vox ceased its chant. For 3 heartbeats, there was only darkness. Then the backup power engaged, and the consoles displayed a final transmission. A coded text stamped with the sigil of the angels resplendent. By decree of purity, Hestara 9 stands absolved. Records to be sealed under custodial secrecy. May the Emperor know what remains. The message looped once and erased itself. The file tree compacted, deleting everything that preceded it. In the silence that followed, I realized the truth. The audits had never sought corruption. They had sought completion. The Marines had not judged us. They had used us to measure the volume of our own obedience. And now, the record was balanced. When the bombardment ended, the bastion still stood. The sky outside had turned opaque, thick with unlit smoke. Ash drifted through cracks in the windows, soft as snow, bitter as scripture. The air tasted of ionized stone and sanctified fuel. I watched it fall, and wondered if this was what forgiveness looked like when measured by tonnage. The Vox lines revived themselves after 37 minutes of silence. What came through was not command traffic, but fragments, records, voices, half-phrases cut, mid-syllable. The sound reminded me of old prayer reels played backward, faith devouring its own echo. Compliance. Static. Achieved. Static. Proceed to audit residuals. Residuals. That word crawled under my skin. In administratum lexicon, residuals refer to debris after cleansing, data fragments after erasure. In military reports, the same term means survivors. The machine reconfigured the broadcast automatically, consolidating fragments into a single coherent stream. The image feed flickered on grainy, washed in blue. The perspective came from the bastion's exterior auspex. The frame shook with aftershock. Across the refinery plain, silhouettes moved among the crater's giant forms outlined by residual firelight. The angels resplendent walked unharmed through ruin, their armor reflecting nothing, as if light itself deferred to their discipline. Behind them followed shapes smaller and unarmored. Civilians. Some crawled, some carried others. The Marines did not strike them. They pointed, directing them into the remains of the refinery silos. A cleansing through containment. Mercy performed by geometry. The Vox clicked again. A single voice this time, clear and deliberate. Archival confirmation required. It was the same voice that had addressed me before, filtered through the helm. I looked at the microphone icon pulsing on the screen. The system awaited my response. "Present," I said. "You witness the Emperor's accounting," came the reply. "All debts must conclude. You will file the remainder." I began recording automatically, words flowing faster than thought. Population reclassification, residual category, status awaiting reassignment. My voice did not tremble. It couldn't. Obedience is a tone, not a choice. Through the lens, I saw the survivors corralled near the central silo. One Marine knelt among them, gauntlet resting on a child's head. The gesture might have been blessing. The Auspex feed cut abruptly to static, then darkness. A moment later, a new document populated my console. Residual containment closed. No signatories. No coordinates. The timestamp marked it 3 seconds into the future. I remember the feeling that followed. Not fear, not grief, merely subtraction. As if the world had removed one of its simpler equations and waited for me to notice the balance improve. The bastion's power fluctuated. Lights dimmed, flared, then steadied at half lumen. The Vox went quiet except for that familiar beat. 3. Pause. 3. The archive had adopted the cadence of the bombardment, or perhaps the bombardment had adopted the cadence of the archive. When I looked up from the console, every other clerk in the hall was standing, staring at their screens in perfect stillness. For the first time since I joined the service, the entire administratum of Hestara IX was synchronized. We had become the record. The synchronization did not fade. Every motion, every sound within the bastion began to echo the same precise cadence. The hum of cogitators, the scrape of quills, even the heartbeat I could feel in my fingertips, all 3 beats. Then pause, 3 beats again. The air itself had joined the ledger. A notice scrolled across the upper lumen band. Custodial presence confirmed. Outside, thunder broke without clouds. The vibration ran through the walls like a slow pulse. I went to the observation port and looked down upon the refinery plains. From this height, the devastation looked clean. Sections of the hive still stood, black geometry surrounded by symmetrical burn patterns, deliberate as handwriting. On the horizon, the angels resplendent assembled. I counted perhaps 20, their formation shaped like an open book. At the center stood one larger than the rest, a banner rising from his armor, fabric burning without smoke. They did not advance or retreat. They watched the ruins as if waiting for the right moment to turn a page. The Vox on my console crackled, then steadied. Administratum Clerk, came that same calm voice, the one that had addressed me during the audits. Do you perceive the Emperor's order? I hesitated. I see the balance of his will, my lord. Then understand it, the voice said. Purity is not destruction, it is subtraction. I could not answer. He continued, unhurried. Every ledger must close. Every breath must justify its place. The Imperium endures because men like you reconcile what must be forgotten. Static filled the line, layered with whispers, binaric prayers, chant fragments, words repeated until they lost all shape. I recognized my own voice among them. You will seal the record, he said finally. Seal it, and be sealed within it. The transmission ended. The order required no confirmation. The system had already obeyed. Across the hall, archivists slumped forward as their terminals shut down one by one, each screen folding into darkness. Mine remained open. The cursor blinked beside the last entry. Residuals. None. I pressed the seal. The sound was final, like a coffin closing underwater. Immediately, the power grid lowered to emergency lumen. The bastion entered archival hibernation, its walls cycling down, its data core retreating into encryption older than the planet itself. I remember the sudden quiet that followed, immense and perfect. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of completion. From the observation port, the marine formation began to disperse, slow and methodical. One paused, helm tilting upward. I could not see his eyes, yet I knew he saw me. The Vox array sparked once, only once, with a phrase so faint it could have been memory. Well accounted. Then they were gone, disappearing into the golden haze, leaving only the rhythm behind them. Inside the bastion, we remained at our posts, surrounded by the hum of machines winding down. I watched my own reflection flicker across, the console screen, my face indistinct, overlaid with the faint outline of the Imperial sigil. In that merging of man and record, I understood the true audit. I was the remainder. The next transmission bore no encryption. It arrived as open signal, clear and deliberate. Custodial officer inbound. Prepare witness access. The console illuminated a single corridor on my map, the Ascension Hall. I knew what that meant. The angels were returning, this time to speak rather than to act unseen. The bastion's inner doors sealed themselves. The temperature dropped. Every lumen dimmed to the gold, permitted for sanctified presence. The air gained weight. not from heat or pressure but from meaning. I walked the empty corridor toward the Ascension Hall, each step accompanied by the faint echo of 3 beats, and paused the pulse of our new order. The Marine awaited me at the hall's center, motionless amid the fog of extinguished incense. His armor was no longer resplendent. It was darkened by use, edges scorched where light had failed to cling. The aquila across his chest bore streaks that might once have been handprints. He regarded me with the stillness of a statue waiting for prayer. "Clerk," he said. His vox made the word vast. "My lord, you have served with clarity." "Thank you, my lord." He inclined his helm slightly, perhaps acknowledging humility, perhaps calculating it. "Your archive holds the final registers. You will erase them now." The command felt ceremonial. "At your order." "Not at mine," he corrected, turning his gaze toward the ceiling where the vox channels hummed faintly. "At his. Mercy demands conclusion." I hesitated. "If I erase the records, there will be nothing left of the faithful." "That is the point," he said, not unkindly. "Their devotion is proven when nothing remains to testify but faith itself." He stepped forward, towering until my own reflection disappeared within the mirrored curve of his breastplate. "Do you doubt the Emperor's design?" "I don't know his design," I answered truthfully. "Then serve it," he said. "Erase what was. Let the record be pure." I returned to my console, its screen trembling with static light. Each command required my biometric seal. As I pressed my hand to the plate, I felt a warmth spread up my arm alive. Pulsing, the deletion began. Line after line of population data vanished into brightness. Each disappearance registered as a chime, as though the machine itself gave absolution. The Marine watched in silence. When it was done, the screen displayed only a single phrase: "Mercy rendered." He turned to leave, but I found courage enough to speak. "My lord, what becomes of those who remain?" He paused in the doorway. "If they endure, it will be as part of his proof." The door sealed behind him. The hall returned to ordinary gravity, though the air still tasted of something final. I stared at the blank console, unsure whether I had just committed a miracle or a crime. The last entry blinked once more before fading. "Mercy rendered." I remember silence teaching me that absolution often sounds like deletion. The deletion order propagated through the entire bastion within seconds. Every archive, every ledger, every cross-reference began to dissolve calmly, obediently, as if the data itself sought peace. The glow from the cogitators softened to the color of candlelight. Rows of terminals whispered their final prayers in machine tongue and fell quiet one by one. I remained seated, watching numbers collapse into zeros. There was a strange beauty in it. I had spent my life chasing order, and now order devoured its own history. Across the hall, the senior data priests gathered before the dormant cogitator core. Their augmetics flickered as they recited the benediction of closure, voices overlapping in static harmony. As data returns to void, so the void remembers. They bowed to their own reflection in the polished metal, and began to unplug themselves from the network. One by one, their eyes dimmed as connection severed. I wanted to believe they felt peace. I wanted to believe I did too. A tremor coursed through the floor, distant, methodical. The angels resplendent had begun another phase. Through the observation slits, I saw pillars of light stabbing upward from the refinery belt. Each beam lingered a few seconds before fading, leaving a perfect circle of darkness where fire had been, geometry as devotion, the world being rewritten into symmetry. My console blinked unexpectedly. A new file had appeared without authorization, Custodial Appendix Personal Ledger. It contained a single line awaiting input. Testimony optional. Optional. The word felt alien here. I typed without thinking. "We served as instructed." The screen replied. "Instruction fulfilled. Reflection required." Reflection. I hesitated, then wrote, "I do not know if this was mercy." The cursor froze. The machine paused long enough to feel like contemplation. Then came the response. "Mercy is never known. It is recorded." The text dissolved into blank light. My terminal went dark. Moments later, the chamber door reopened. The same marine stood framed by the smoke, helm tilted as though measuring the air. "It is done." "Yes, my lord." He looked at the silent cogitators. "A world remembered correctly is a world no longer needed." He approached, and for the first time I noticed a fissure along his left pauldron, a wound in the gilding where black ceramite showed through. Through it leaked a faint radiance, not fire, not plasma, but a quiet illumination like breath on glass. "Do you understand now, Clark?" "I understand the procedure," I said. He regarded me for a moment that felt like judgment, then turned away. "That is enough." When he left, the hall dimmed again. The only light came from the reflection on my own hands, still faintly glowing from the deletions. Feedback. I flexed my fingers, and the afterimage shimmered, then faded into ordinary flesh. Outside, the bombardment had ceased. Hestara IX no longer burned. It glowed faintly, as if the planet itself were cooling into relic. The air hummed with residual power, Ahaiim reduced to its bones. I remember silence teaching me that mercy and memory share the same face, one side seen, one side erased. The day after the deletion, a strange quiet took root. The bastion functioned on habit alone, machines operated, but no one issued commands. What remained of the staff performed their tasks as ritual, writing into ledgers that no longer stored anything. The pages self-erased before the ink could dry, the parchment whitening in seconds like frost. I wandered the hall where the marine had stood. The incense had settled into dust, faint and grey. Beneath the layers of ash, I could still see the outline of his boots, pressed into the marble, a relief carved by weight and meaning. I touched one, print, and felt warmth residual, steady, living. At midday, the planetary auspex reported calm. No further bombardment, no communication, no incoming craft. Hestara IX had fallen silent in every measurable frequency. The quiet had the density of belief. It pressed against my ears until thought itself felt like intrusion. The Vox receivers powered on by themselves. A voice emerged unfiltered, almost gentle. "Clerk of Hestara," it said, "you have completed his measure. Stand witness one last time." The bastion lights rose to full strength. Through the northern window, I saw the fleet preparing to depart. Enormous silhouettes, each a cathedral of war, drifted from orbit like distant saints abandoning the faithful. For a moment, their engines painted the horizon in molten gold, and Hestara Nines looked redeemed. The voice continued, quieter now. "Do you comprehend mercy?" I wanted to answer, but words fractured before they reached my mouth. The only sound I managed was breath. "Mercy," the voice said, "is the space left between perfection and obedience. You have served within that space." The transmission ended, leaving the air charged with residual static. The walls vibrated once, like the last chord of a hymn. I returned to my console, though its screen had long since gone dark. Without thinking, I placed my palm against the surface. The panel warmed beneath my hand, and faint light returned an afterimage of the deleted archives. Not text, not data, something older, more human. The shapes resembled faces, thousands of them, drawn in the light and erased just as quickly. The display pulsed 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. I understood then that the data had not been destroyed. It had been absorbed, reconciled into the will of the angels, into the Emperor's own endless calculus. The world had become an entry in his divine ledger, folded and filed under completion. I lifted my hand. The glow faded. The bastion hummed once more, faintly, like a heart steadying after strain. I remember silence teaching me that understanding is not permission. It is merely the sound of creation closing a file. Beyond the window, the last of the fleet vanished into the dark, leaving only contrails of burning gold. They lingered briefly, forming the shape of the Aquila before dispersing into smoke. The sky no longer burned, it recorded. When morning came, there was no dawn. The ash clouds had thickened into a ceiling that reflected nothing. The refinery stacks no longer burned. Their silhouettes rose like the ribs of a creature long dissected and preserved. The bastion hummed faintly, sustained by backup generators that seemed reluctant to stop breathing. I sat at my station, though there was no work left to do. The docket displayed only a single page. Planetary file closed. The cursor blinked in the margin, patient, as if waiting for one final annotation. Around me, the other clerks had gone still. Some remained upright in their seats, hands frozen over extinct quills. Others had folded forward, heads resting against cooling consoles. The silence among them felt intentional, as though every breath had been synchronized into one long pause. A faint chime broke the stillness. My console, against all logic, received a new message. The header bore the mark of the custodial seal, though no fleet remained in orbit. I opened it. To the archivists of Hestara Ix, you are to maintain operation until final confirmation of silence. Record what remains, and do not attempt transmission beyond the void. The text ended there. No signature. No timestamp. I looked around the hall. None of the others moved. Perhaps the message was for me alone. I began typing. Current planetary condition, stable. Population register, null. Archive integrity, complete. Each line appeared, then dimmed into transparency as the system stored it in redundant loops. I added another entry, witness status, active, and the system paused before responding with a simple word. Noted. The power grid stuttered. Somewhere below, a generator coughed out its last reserves. The sound reminded me of prayer interrupted by sleep. I rose from my bench and walked the length of the archive. Every step stirred motes of ash into the air, tiny reflections of the lumen strips overhead. The marble floor bore faint imprints of boots, far larger than any humans. I followed them toward the eastern exit. The door recognized my clearance and opened onto the courtyard. Outside, the wind had ceased entirely. The sky was the color of cooled metal. What remained of the city stretched to the horizon in perfect symmetry. Streets aligned, towers leveled to identical heights. It was as if the Emperor himself had measured it with divine precision and found it worthy of equilibrium. A sound reached me, distant, rhythmic. I thought at first it was machinery still working below the refineries, but no, it came from higher, beyond, the sky. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. The rhythm of creation and deletion, the cadence of mercy itself. I knelt, unable to remain standing beneath the weight of that pulse. My breath joined its measure. I remember silence teaching me that endings are not absence but accounting. The world had been balanced. The bastion lights finally surrendered. One by one, the lumen coils flickered and died until the archive was left to the weak blue of residual power. The consoles pulsed faintly, as if breathing in their sleep. I moved among them with the caution of a priest among tombs, touching nothing, yet feeling the presence of everything we had recorded. The vox hummed without transmission. I caught the whisper of static that almost formed my name, but it was only the wind finding its way through the vents. The silence that followed was complete enough to hear my own pulse counting out the rhythm that had replaced the world. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. I walked toward the hall's central dais, where the master seal rested, a plate of polished brass, engraved with the imperial sigil. Every planetary archive ends with a single act, the final closure. One clerk must seal the ledger, marking the transition from history to memory. The others had already been sealed by fatigue, devotion, or both. The duty had found me. The control runes beneath the plate still glowed. I placed my hand upon them and felt the faint surge of warmth. The machine recognized me. The air filled with faint choral tones that once served as our closing benediction. By his light, all accounts are reconciled. I spoke the words aloud, voice steady but thin. The master seal lowered with a sigh, locking the archive into hibernation. Gears interlocked beneath the floor, and the last pulse of power drained into the core. The room fell dark, the kind of dark that belongs to places ready for preservation. For a long time, I stood there, listening to the emptiness. When my eyes adjusted, I saw faint phosphorescence along the marble walls, lines of residual data, crawling like veins, pulsing weakly. The archive was not dead, it dreamed. I returned to my bench. The console flickered once more, displaying a message that had no sender. Witness acknowledged. Beneath it appeared another line. Await confirmation of silence. The phrase repeated at regular intervals. Each time it appeared, the letters grew fainter. I understood. The system was waiting for me to stop responding. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The hum of the planet reached through the floor, the last music of its furnaces cooling. I imagined the surface above streets lined with ash, towers leveled to the same patient height, the wind carrying no sound but balance. When I opened my eyes again, the screen had dimmed completely. Only my reflection remained, hovering in the faint light of dying circuits. Behind that reflection, another image flickered, the faint outline of a winged figure, or perhaps just the distortion left by memory refusing to end. I bowed my head. "The Emperor protects," I whispered, though the words carried no expectation of reply. I remember silence teaching me that faith endures longest when there is no one left to hear it. Outside, Hestara 9s did not move. The world had achieved its purpose. It had become still. Section 5, The Quiet Ledger. Part 3, Final. I do not know how long I sat there after the light died. Time has no meaning once the world stops measuring itself. The air was thin, touched with the cold of machinery dreaming in its sleep. My breath made small clouds that drifted toward the ceiling and disappeared, like unfinished prayers. At some point, the Vox emitted one last tone, a faint chime, the same 3 beats and pause that had haunted every chamber since the first audit began. This time, it sounded gentle, almost human. A voice followed, low, steady, stripped of mechanical resonance. "Clerk of Hestara," it said. "Final entry." I rose instinctively, though there was no one left to see. The console reawakened, its surface pale gold. The final field blinked, awaiting input. My reflection stared back at me through the glass, gaunt and half-remembered. "What am I to record?" I asked aloud, though I already knew. The Vox answered with silence, long enough to feel deliberate. I placed my hands upon the console. Words came without thought. Planet Hestara 9. Condition complete. Faith index verified. Mercy rendered. I paused, then added one more line. Survivor total 1. The system processed the statement. A slow pulse passed through the floor, moving outward like a heartbeat carried into stone. Then the text dissolved, leaving only a single word at the center of the screen: absolved. The temperature began to rise slightly. The archive's walls exhaled stored air, the faint scent of ash and sanctified oil. I realized the bastion was sealing itself from within, closing its final aperture to the outer world. It no longer needed to speak. It had become its own confession. I remember the first time I had signed a requisition order as a novice clerk, my hand trembling, afraid of error. There is no fear of error here. The Emperor's arithmetic has no remainder. We have all been rounded to perfection. I removed my data signet and placed it on the console, a gesture taught in the academy for those whose ledgers will not continue. The metal cooled instantly against the glass. The light from the dying lumen strip caught its edges, turning it briefly to gold before darkness claimed it. Outside the viewport, the ash settled evenly across the ruined city. In the distance, the sun caught a sliver of the upper atmosphere, painting it with a muted ring of amber. For an instant, Hestara 9X looked peaceful, balanced, finished. I closed my eyes and breathed once more, not as ritual, but as acknowledgement. The console dimmed, sealing the record. The hum faded until only the slow rhythm of my heartbeat remained, steady, measured, willing to join the cadence of the world. In the end, even silence filed itself under compliance.